Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Saturday, February 4th, 2023. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. Across the continental U.S. this Saturday afternoon, not much going on in the nation's midsection. Recall the big ice storm across areas of the south last week. The big weather story has been up in the northeast. A shot of Arctic air, the polar vortex rotating down out of Canada, Hudson Bay, brought bitter cold temperatures. Top of Mount Washington, the highest point in the northeast U.S., that's over 6,200 feet in New Hampshire. Measured a temperature of 46 below zero last night, early this Saturday morning. They had winds gusting to 120 miles an hour plus, creating a wind chill of 108 degrees below zero. So that's some incredible bitter cold for them. Here in Alaska, we do have some pretty cold temperatures there across the far north throughout the north slope. Winter storm warnings are going to be in effect overnight through Sunday morning. Areas of the northwest Arctic coast, and then further toward the south and west, blizzard warnings continue for the western Seward Peninsula, around Tin City, Wales, on over into St. Lawrence Island. And then a winter weather advisory will be in effect Turnagain Pass, Portage Valley, the eastern Kenai, Sunday mid-morning into Sunday evening. And then another winter weather advisory will go into effect Sunday afternoon into Monday morning for the Haines and Klondike highways due to some accumulating snow with the next frontal band that will be pushing up in through the Panhandle. But this afternoon, very cold temperatures in the far north. Dead Horse sitting at 40 below zero in the early afternoon. It was as cold as 50 below earlier today at Umiat. And further west, Wales getting those blizzard conditions, blowing snow, a temperature at 1 above. And again, those blizzard conditions will continue across the western Seward Peninsula in areas, portions of St. Lawrence Island overnight and into Sunday. Further south central, some breaks in the cloud cover. Knit there up on the north end of Cook Inlet. Well, there have been some periods of snow. Anchorage area has picked up several inches of snow since the middle of this past week through the weekend. Few different rounds of snow bringing 2-3 inches of snow here and there, and it adds up over time. Heidelberg in the far southern area of the Panhandle, 46 degrees with some occasional light rain and light fog. So here, this is where the winter storm warning is in effect. It includes primarily Wainwright down through Point Lay, where they expect additional snowfall along with some strong gusty winds and very cold temperatures. Low temperatures are going to be 25-30 below in this region, with winds gusting well over 30 to 40 miles an hour. Down here, blizzard warnings in effect for the western Seward Peninsula. That includes Teller, Wales, Tin City, as well as for St. Lawrence Island. Further south, a winter weather advisory will go into effect Sunday mid-morning, 9 a.m. through 9 p.m. for the eastern portion of the Kenai Peninsula, and that would include Portage Valley and Turnagain Pass, where as much as 4 to 10 inches of snow could fall in those more populated areas. The surrounding mountains, though, on the west side here of Prince William Sound could see as much as 2 feet of snow from this system. And then further east, as we go into Sunday mid-afternoon through mid-morning Monday, the Haines Highway and the Klondike Highway have a winter weather advisory in effect for several inches of accumulating snow, at least a good 3 to 6 inches of snow possible there, especially come Sunday night into early Monday morning. Satellite imagery shows moisture lifting northward along just off the western Canadian coast up there through the northeastern Pacific and eastern Gulf. We have another area of clouds. There's going to be a little stronger low come up out of the North Pacific. That is the low that's going to bring the bulk of the accumulating snow there, especially to the eastern Kenai as we go through tomorrow afternoon and evening. Further west, a scattering of snow showers and rain showers mix the lower Bering in through the Aleutian chain. And then in the far north, the cold air is in place with the gustier winds up along the northwest Arctic coast down, passing through the Bering Strait. And overall, this pattern will continue here over the next couple of days. Most of the frontal action, most of the low pressures are going to be here across the Gulf, extending westward into the lower Bering Sea, and then we're going to have some energy coming up out of the North Pacific. Here's the low we'll keep an eye on as we go into Sunday. Here by early Sunday morning prior to daybreak, low will be southwest of Kodiak Island, and then by Sunday afternoon, that low will continue working its way northeastward as it weakens, going up Cook Inlet. A little secondary low may try to form just off the Kenai, but that's what's going to bring some of the heavier snows there, the eastern Kenai, west side of Prince William Sound, at least Sunday, especially afternoon and evening. And then by the time we get into Monday afternoon, that low weakens, and then kind of another one just kind of takes shape back here toward Bristol Bay. And we'll keep some precipitation areas of precipitation going on and off along the Gulf Coast with this frontal band pushing inland, and still gusty winds along areas of the northwest Arctic coast down through the lower Chukchi Sea and in through the Bering Strait. Temperatures above freezing the southern panhandle overnight, nothing really new there. Below freezing south central interior, 7 above at Talkeetna and Glen Allen, and then back up into the low 40s outer areas, Sitka down through Ketchikan. Still below freezing in Anchorage, but a little above freezing along the Kenai coast. And then for Monday morning, we're still looking for low temperatures generally above freezing central southern panhandle. A few single digit readings up there toward Glen Allen as you get up into the Copper River Basin. But by Monday afternoon, temperatures could be close to the freezing mark all the way up toward Anchorage. And looking in the far north, this is where the cold air is going to be. Many temperatures tonight, 20s, 30s below, could be some isolated 40 below readings up through the north slope. And then daytime highs very cold up there along the Arctic coast, north slope, 20s and 30s below, but a little better here as you get toward the Yukon River. You start to get temperatures back up near or a bit above zero. And then Monday morning lows again in the 20s and 30s below up there will be quite common. Even some of the cold air spilling into the western side of the Seward Peninsula. And daytime highs Monday afternoon should generally be below zero from around Shishmaref all the way up toward Kaktovik, but into the single digits above zero, generally along the Yukon River. Finally, in the southwest, we expect lows above freezing along the Alaska Peninsula in through the areas of the Aleutians. Interior falling off into the single digits above or below as you creep up through the middle upper Yukon and Kuskokwim basins. And then Sunday afternoon, above freezing, king salmon down through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Lows Monday morning, single digits above or below zero as you get up, especially north and northeast of Bethel toward Anvik and any interior locations. And then Monday afternoon highs will be a bit cooler there, especially up along the Yukon River Basin, but temperatures should generally be above freezing as you get out toward the central Alaska Peninsula through the Aleutians. The 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, February 10th through February 14th, Valentine's Day. Generally near normal temperatures across most of the state except for the northwest, centered on the Seward Peninsula and up Kotzebue to Utqiagvik. Could end up being a bit below normal with precipitation averaging above normal across the southern half of the state, especially along and south of the Yukon River.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather, and let's take a look at flying conditions here. If you're heading out either on Sunday or Monday, we do expect rather widespread IFR conditions along areas Kodiak Island, North Pacific extending across the Alaska Peninsula, southwest coast all the way on up through St. Lawrence and the Bering Strait and much of the Seward Peninsula, pockets of IFR, intercoastal mountains here of the Panhandle, areas around Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, Wrangell, St. Elias on up toward the east central Alcan border. And then for Sunday afternoon, rather widespread IFR conditions extending across much of the Panhandle, eastern, northern Gulf, Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, Kodiak Island, entrance of Cook Inlet, westward Bristol Bay, in through the central Bering. And as we extend that out into Monday morning, maybe not quite as widespread, but still IFR holding on across much of the Panhandle, especially inner channels, intercoastal mountains up along the northern Gulf Coast. Including Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, and back toward Bristol Bay. We'll have an area of low pressure that's weakening and working its way across Kodiak Island on up into Cook Inlet and dissipating. And then finally, as we get into Monday afternoon, we'll continue to see some IFR conditions along the intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle, Wrangell, St. Elias, on up to especially the south side of the Alaska Range with a little ribbon out there in through the southeast and central Bering. AKwx Pass will see VFR conditions on Sunday. There's going to be some really cold air farther north along the North Slope, Arctic and Northwest Arctic coast. Air temperatures 20s, 30s below with some brisk winds creating wind chills at times down around 50 below zero. But AKwx Pass VFR, Adigan Pass VFR, further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill, MVFR conditions becoming IFR. Some of that moisture lifts a little further northward from out of Cook Inlet and the western Gulf. Rainy Pass MVFR conditions, Windy Pass will be MVFR. Try to become maybe a brief interval of VFR conditions Sunday afternoon. Further east, Isabel Pass starts out IFR Sunday morning, giving way to VFR conditions, especially along and south of the south entrance, holding on to MVFR conditions to the north. Mentasta Pass, MVFR conditions becoming VFR, though the south entrance there southward will be holding on to MVFR conditions. Tanita Pass, generally MVFR conditions are expected Sunday, though IFR conditions will exist a little further to the south there of the east entrance. And then Portage Pass, generally IFR conditions, especially out over Prince William Sound, the east entrance, but the west entrance there remaining MVFR. Finally, far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see MVFR conditions becoming IFR. And freezing levels aloft bump up to 2,000 and 4,000 feet ahead of this area of low pressure that'll be riding northeastward. Otherwise, the surface freezing line runs along the lower central Bering to just north of St. Paul, across the Alaska Peninsula to the entrance of Cook Inlet along the northern Gulf Coast, and then in through the central inner channels there of the Panhandle. Greatest threat for icing. Moderate icing possible over a large area of the Gulf, especially back toward the western Gulf, above 6,000 feet along the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface, and then above 4,000 feet there, the western Gulf on the east side of the Kenai, Kodiak Island. And looking at the upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet, a broad trough of low pressure generally over the Bering Sea. Ahead of it, we have a jet core upwards of 130 knots in the North Pacific, and with those stronger winds coming onshore through the Panhandle, British Columbia. But again, that's at 30,000 feet. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, we have a couple of lows, one kind of between Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula back toward the southeastern Bering, with a broad area of winds around and just over 50 knots up through areas of the lower Gulf. Also just south of the Alaska Range, we do see some winds aloft from the south at 60 knots, and then bringing it down to 3,000 feet. A couple of low centers, one centered over Kodiak Island Sunday afternoon, another one back just west of Bristol Bay. Circulation around that will bring stronger winds in excess of 50 to 65 knots along the northern and northeastern Gulf Coast, and then just south of Kodiak Island, where we expect potential for some severe turbulence there along areas of the northern, northeastern Gulf Coast, surface to 6,000 feet, and then also this area back to just south of Kodiak Island. There could be some severe turbulence. Otherwise, across much of the southern half of the state, extending out into the Aleutians, there is that potential for moderate turbulence, generally surface to 4,000 feet. So if you do have a flight, check the latest conditions and have a safe one.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse, we're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. And the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's wrap up the show with the marine weather segment. As we usually do, the sea ice edge. There are some plenty of openings there along the shore just west of Utqiagvik, as well as within Kotzebue Sound, the north side of Shishmaref and the Seward Peninsula, and then down in the eastern areas of Norton Sound, as well as along the Russian coastline. And as we go further south and west, last week and prior to that, there had been some melting along areas of Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, but with winds having more of a northerly component, the ice could drift a little further southward again here over the next couple of days. The pack ice definitely surrounding in the vicinity there of St. Matthew, but still ice-free further south toward the Pribilov Islands. And looking at the southeast panhandle for Sunday, winds are going to be picking up in inner channels, a south or westerly component through the lower half to 30 knots, waves 6 feet. Southeast winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves, Lynn Canal. But in the outer coast, the winds are going to pick up to gale force, especially as you get west and northwest of Craig through Sitka, and increase upwards to even briefly some 50-knot easterly storm force winds around Cape Suckling, with waves there as high as 20 feet or so. And then on Monday, winds will come down. Inner channels, generally 20-25 knots. There could still be some gusts there in the mid-channels around Petersburg. 35 knots, waves 4 to as high as 7 feet to Dixon Entrance. And then the outer coast winds will generally be southwesterly, 20 to 25 knots, with waves running 15 to 18 feet in the open waters. Now, for the northwestern Gulf, low is going to be approaching from southwest there of Kodiak Island. Strongest winds off the Kenai, and here at the entrance of Cook Inlet and lower Cook Inlet, 50 to 55 knot northeasterly winds. East winds to 35 knots there within Prince William Sound. Waves there 9 feet. And then on Monday, winds definitely come down across the western and northwest Gulf. Look for southwest winds off the Kenai, 30 knots, waves 18 feet. South winds to 20 knots in Prince William Sound, waves 4 feet. And then winds turn more of a southwest to west through the lower half of Cook Inlet with waves of 4 to 6 feet. On Sunday, across Kodiak Island, winds will be around 50 knots out of the southeast ahead of this low, and then wrapping around to the northeast through Shelikof Strait, where waves could be as high as 15 feet, in excess of 20 feet east of Kodiak Island, and then turning northeast and then finally westerly across the lower Alaska Peninsula. Waves as high as 8 feet there on the Bering side and north of Cold Bay. And then on Monday, winds will continue to come down across the region, generally out of the west at 25 to 30 knots, wave 7 feet, Shelikof Strait, generally running 14, 15 feet well off of the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, and 7 to 11 feet there, the Bering side, once you get away from the ice there up in Bristol Bay. And then across the Aleutian chain, winds will be west to northwest, 25 to 20 knots there, eastern Aleutians, but 30 to 35 knots, especially west of Nikolsky. Waves 12, 13 feet on the North Pacific side, and about 8 to 14 feet, especially there north of Atka and Adak. And then on Monday, winds will generally be out of the west, 25 to 30 knots, though you could still have some low-end gale force winds to 35 knots on the North Pacific side, with waves of 16 to 18 feet. And across the southwest coast, winds will be northeast to north, 25 to 30 knots over the ice, so that ice could shift a little further south. 20 knots out of the north there at St. Paul with 8-foot waves. And then across Norton Sound, winds will be northerly 20 knots on Monday, as high as 30 knots south of St. Lawrence Island, and then turning a bit more northwesterly south there from St. Matthew down to St. Paul, with waves 10 feet in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. And along the Arctic coast, northeast winds 10 knots, but they pick up upwards to 30 knots, Point Lay down through the Bering Strait. And as we go into Monday, look for east-northeast winds continuing. Kaktovik westward through Utqiagvik at 10 knots, but then 25 to 30 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and out of the north there, north side of St. Lawrence Island. And look, here's the low pressure, the one that'll be gathering a little strength coming out of the North Pacific just southwest of Kodiak Island in the pre-dawn hours of Sunday morning. That system will move up toward, it's going to kind of split, but come up through perhaps Cook Inlet with accumulating snows, especially the east side of the Kenai Peninsula. And the strongest winds there at the entrance of Cook Inlet and areas near Kodiak Island. And then by Monday, that low weakens Prince William Sound with a secondary low toward Bristol Bay.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.